Climate change is one of the most pressing issues in today's world, and I think we saw that how much it impacted Pakistan and especially Lahore and other cities of Pakistan during the smog season. This year, the intensity of the smog crisis is way more than the previous and the earlier years.
How each year, 2022, 23, 24, we're told that this is the warmest year on record. And an example of this is record breaking, again, rains in Pakistan. Pre monsoon, we had glacier melting, we had a lot of rains in the northern areas. But all over the world, then we saw those events. We saw how UAE faced record breaking rain, never before recorded in its history.
Actually, get more funding than Pakistan. And Pakistan can really get as much funding as them. Even neighboring countries such as Bangladesh get more funding than Pakistan.
So each subsequent, and this reminds me of the Simpsons meme as well, when Bart Simpson is standing and saying that, it's so hot this year, this summer is the hottest, and then of course Homer comes in and says it's the hottest year yet, because each year we have the record being broken. Hello and welcome to Front Seat to Climate Change. As 2024 ends, it's important to recap on the climate events that have taken place throughout the year. We did a roundup last year, and since then, a couple of things have happened in terms of climate disasters that have taken place in 2024, but also certain changes in the international climate diplomacy sphere. Joining me is Mahin Khan.
Hi, Dawar. So happy to be on Front Seat. And I think it's very, very important to talk about this year's roundup. And it's very important to talk about climate change because climate change is one of the most pressing issues in today's world. And I think we saw that how much it impacted Pakistan and especially Lahore and other cities of Pakistan during the smog season.
I'm very happy that you've joined us, and I think it's time to announce as well that we'll be doing this on a regular basis. Expect to hear from me and Maheen at least once per month talking about climate change in 2025. So jumping right into the crux of things, I think the COP 29 and then the COP 16 in Riyadh as well, there is in the international sphere this growing anxiety that the climate diplomacy sphere is not succeeding in bringing the right amount of resources to developing countries. At the same time, as you mentioned, the poor air quality, particularly in Pakistan and India, but also all over the world. I think what I saw in the recent WHO report, only 5 countries have managed to comply with WHO's guidelines for air quality. So all over the world, the air pollution is worsening, again, cause of fossil fuel use and poor climate governance. I think one thing that we can start off with is discussing the air quality matter. Now, mind you, you've also been in Lahore and like you experience it on a daily basis. We know that the sources are fossil fuel for both climate change and air quality. But in terms of health, particularly and personal level impacts, what did you feel? And this is something that other people will resonate with as well. That how can we really advocate for increased clean energy, better fuel to make sure that air pollution levels go down and we have healthy environments again?
So I think when we talk about the smog crisis, I think it's very important to understand that this crisis existed way before this year. I think, but yes, this year the intensity of the smog crisis is way more than the previous and the earlier years. Um, it's very, very important to also understand that the smog crisis is a health crisis because when the smog crisis happened in Lahore, the respiratory cases in Lahore, they were, I think, around about 75,000, and the figures were increasing all the time. The children were sort of smoking cigarettes because of the smog crisis because the air quality was so poor. So this year truly actually showed us that the climate change problem is something that we all have to worry about. It's something that's everyone's problem. It's our problem. It's the government's problem.
So I think it's important to touch about the intensity of these environmental and climate events. And the number one thing that keeps coming to my mind is that how each year, 2022, 23, 24, we're told that this is the warmest year on record. So each subsequent, and this reminds me of the Simpsons meme as well, when Bart Simpson is standing and saying that, it's so hot this year, this summer is the hottest. And then, of course, Homer comes in and says it's the hottest year yet, because each year we have the record being broken. We've exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius already. which means that previous assumptions about reaching the target are not likely going to be met. So we're now looking at 2 degrees of warming, or at least somewhere in between 1.5 and 2 degrees in the coming few decades. This means more climate disasters. This means more and more casualties in terms of human impacts. And an example of this is record-breaking, again, rains in Pakistan. Pre-monsoon, we had glacier melting, we had a lot of rains in the northern areas. But all over the world, then we saw those events. We saw how UAE faced record-breaking rain, never before recorded in its history, within a span of a day. And I think similarly, we've had, events all over the world.
Yeah, I think we saw that 2024 was recorded as the hottest year, and we saw that July was the hottest month. And then we also saw the wildfires in Canada, which were the largest in history. And I think around about 20 million hectares of land was affected. So I think it's a global problem. And like I've reiterated before as well, that climate change is everyone's problem. The whole world needs to come together to really solve it. But I think it's very important to understand it, how it's impacting us individually, because on an individual level also, if we start understanding the impacts of climate change, and if we start raising awareness in our own capacities, and we start taking it seriously, which the smog issue truly showed us that we need to start taking it seriously, a lot can be done, and we should not underestimate the impact of our actions.
No, I would actually, agree with you that we are not serious about a lot of these things, especially the people leading us. So at the leadership level, I think again and again we see a huge lag in what they've been able to achieve and what is needed. And I think COP 29 was a perfect example of this. We decided in COP 28 that there will be, a loss and damage fund. It did not get the right amount of commitments from the developed world. Similarly, during this COP, a lot of things were pushed forward, particularly in regards to carbon markets, but during the COP, not much happened. And this is again the theme that we have been observing over the last few years, that the dynamic of COP, the climate conference itself, is not really suited to what it was supposed to be doing. So even this year, I think I felt this, that all the countries went and they put up these stalls, considering it as more like a worldwide expo rather than doing the actual negotiations. And it does, waste a lot of energy and time and resources, but especially for a developing country like ours. So I think we have to come up with sort of sordid conclusion here, that maybe it's time to locally step up as well.
I agree with you. This year's COP was actually categorized as the first ever climate finance COP, and of course, like, it was expected that climate finance would be scaled up to a level that would really help the vulnerable nations. And of course, pledges were made and amounts were announced as well. 300 billion is to be mobilized by developed nations to developing countries annually, and another, I think, 1.3 trillion dollars are supposed to be mobilized to countries by all financial actors. But I think the problem is, like you mentioned, that these financial streams are gone to developing countries through organizations like the Green Climate Fund, World Bank. So there is no direct stream for developing countries to sort of like access these funds. And time, I think we're also talking about the same COP that truly took 30 years to actually operationalize the loss and damage fund. So we need to start coming up with localized solution. We need to start capacity building. We all know that Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries when it comes to climate change. I think it's really time to now change the narrative. It's time to really step up. It's time to gain funding from different sorts of funds. Something that's really interesting is that the Green Climate Fund gives funding to a lot of nations, vulnerable nations. So nations that are actually smaller than Pakistan and some island nations actually get more funding than Pakistan. And Pakistan can really get as much funding as them. Even neighboring countries such as Bangladesh get more funding than Pakistan. It's just that we do not do capacity building in the right manner. We don't pay attention to the project proposals, and like you said, there's a lot of lag in the policy level. So
Mhm.
if we really start focusing and building ourselves, and we do start doing capacity building, and we start changing the narrative and start focusing on action and finance, a change can come about, and we can access more funds as well.
No, no, I think this has been a constant issue that what we have been internationally, our narrative is that more needs to be done, which is fine because that's how this debate actually started, that emissions of the global north, the historical emissions are responsible for global warming as well. But at the same time, I do see that there are things like, particularly like air pollution, the example that we began off with. Now, this is an issue of our local transportation system, our agricultural practices, our power sector, and all of this has been becoming an issue because consecutive years we've not done anything to resolve these challenges, such as putting in more public transport, such as making it harder for polluting vehicles to be on the road, for polluting industries to be operational. And this is where the action needs to take place. I think one thing that positive that did come out this year has been the realization among various developing countries that the resources that we need have to be developed locally in terms of putting up carbon market projects, making sure that we are able to access finance through other instruments such as green finance loans, green debt, nature for debt swaps. All of these things are now ideas that developing countries are looking for because, to be very honest, this seems to be only approach or way forward rather than continuing waiting for years and years for climate finance to come in.
I think at this point, it's very important to mention also that this year COP sort of laid the groundwork for the carbon market mechanism. So, under Article 6, 6.4, and 6.2 of the Paris Agreement, now carbon emissions and the emission reductions can be generated and traded within different countries. And Pakistan is also looking into the guidelines for the carbon markets.
So I think that's good news. We have something in place which developing countries can start utilizing. Carbon markets did have some benefit for countries like India in the past, particularly China as well. And more developing countries need to take these examples and utilize this approach. I think one last special mention for our local level is that climate change and air pollution, these both things are being recognized very well in our national media as well. And talking about Dawn, particularly the Breathe Pakistan campaign, is an example of this, where 5 years ago you wouldn't have taken climate change as a serious issue in Pakistani media. But looking at the impact starting all the way since the 2018 smog episodes, then 2022 floods, the heat waves, I think the realization is that these issues are going to be a permanent feature unless we strongly advocate for improvements, changes, reforms that can help this. And I think that is our concluding message here, that locally led initiatives, more advocacy, media talking about it more, and people then, reacting it as a community, as a society, to making sure that we get the right changes in place to make sure that we can start mitigating the worst impacts of climate change.
I think what you just said makes complete sense because if we don't talk about it, we won't take it seriously. And especially in today's day and age, we really need to leverage the power of media and the power of social media. And exactly what Breathe Pakistan is doing is amazing because it's sort of integrating everyone under one platform and it's talking about climate change again, which is the most pressing issue in Pakistan. And it's sort of mobilizing our youth as well, and it's integrating our youth into the most pressing issue of this country because our youth is our future, right? So people need to be aware about it. Everyone needs to take it seriously, and awareness only comes when communities are built. So you're right. The hope is that everyone starts talking about it and everyone starts doing things that are in their own capacities.
I think with that, let's sign off to year 2024 and hoping to see you and our viewers and audience in 2025, continuing discussions on climate change, being on the front seat to the most devastating impacts of climate change. It's continuously important that we keep on talking about it. With that, bye bye everyone, and Happy New Year.